off with some introductions. As I say, I'm Zabro for WildStar Central. I'm the administrator and I run that site. And we'll start off with our kind of token carbonite for the evening. Take it away, Anna.
Hello, I'm Mark Humes. You probably know me better as CRB and Lath on the forums and on Twitter. I'm the European Community Manager, and what that means is I look after all the territories in Europe that are we consider English speaking for the community. So basically not French and German because they're our supported languages. And I'm basically here to take note of everything that's being said and take that back to Carbine and say, hey, these were the topics that we discussed in the EU Town Hall. This is some of the things that we need to either address or talk about a bit more, or maybe feedback or implement or whatever it happens to be. You'll see me around. I'm sure many of you have seen me on Twitter, on the forums and that. I try and be fairly honest and transparent. And if I'm not allowed to talk about something, I'll tell you. So that kind of thing. So hopefully I won't get myself into too much trouble by doing that. So we'll see.
Thank you, Mark. Next up, Jaredar.
Hello everyone, I'm Jeddah. I'm a councillor of the Guild Enigma, and no, that's not the one from the US. We're older than that. I take care of the HR side of things of the guild, so if you ever apply to us, please do. You encounter me.
Thank you, Jaredar. Mispa, you're up.
Hello, gents. Yes, I am Mispa. I also look after Enigma and have various MMO hats, but I'm wearing the Enigma one tonight.
Thank you kindly. And Quota.
Hello, I'm Quota. I'm a kind of an ex-hardcore raider, kind of pushing GA World 5th-ish. I used to raid with Codex. Sadly, no longer do that, but I'm here representing WildStar Radio, the EU division, as their only EU player from the WildStar Radio. But hello, guys.
And last, Dr. Dinkle.
Hi guys, I'm Dr. Dinkelberg, and I'm here from Hazak, EU, representing Grimwalls. I'm just here to listen in and chip in a couple of opinions where needed.
Beautiful. That's our panel for this evening. We are allowing open kind of join from Twitch. If you feel like you want to weigh in, I'll be periodically kind of spamming out the TeamSpeak server so that people can join us. But to start with, we're going to open the discussion with possibly the biggest kind of issue facing the game right at the moment. That's the game's population. And this, of course, includes the mega server announcement. So who wants to start us off here?
Well, might as well. So yeah, like I mentioned, I do the HR stuff for Enigma, and that includes recruitment. And yeah, we noticed the population issues, definitely. We're still going strong so far, barely, but we haven't had a new application for almost a month now. So that's getting quite dire, actually. I'm really looking forward to the whole server merge, and hopefully that will improve things.
It's probably worth throwing in as well as a point of comparison. At one point in time, we were trying to work out how to schedule interviews, and we were running rosters and such just to have enough officers online to do so. So the delta's pretty big. But one thing that occurs to me is there's obviously a difference between population, activity, and the perception of population and activity. And obviously mega servers will help bring everyone together into the same place. But there's also going to be a perception issue that I think needs to be addressed. So it would be good to know not only what the plans are post mega server, but for what the plans are for actually bringing the community sort of together and letting people know, just how many people are running around in whatever capacity.
I think you highlighted it pretty well there. I think the issue currently is the perception of population. With mega servers, you're only going to bring together the population that you currently have. I think it's no secret that WildStar has bled pretty sizable chunk of its player base, and I think what needs to be focused on right now is retention. How do you keep players coming? I know there's been kind of whispers on the grapevines of a subscriber maybe benefits for being a subscriber, maybe like a monthly boombox thing or something, some kind of incentive to keep players subscribed in the works. But I know that we're not going to expect that anytime soon. But I think currently, right now, I think mega servers are going to do a lot to help the population. But as a hardcore raider, or as an ex-hardcore raider, I know the biggest problems that we face, and I know the biggest problems that raiding guilds currently face, isn't necessarily, bugs in the game, but is finding bodies to fill the recruitment needs. You're not going to have people quitting every week. You need to keep a roster larger than what the content demands. So with 40-man raiding, you need to have realistically, 50 people so that you can have 40 people every single time you raid. And currently, right now, it's really, really sad. I know Enigma has been raiding with 36 people, 35 people these past couple of weeks. I mean, this is just what I've heard. I don't know if this is for sure, but I'm pretty sure they haven't been raiding with 40 people. And Eugenic was lucky enough really to get a whole bunch of people that had to re-roll to join Eugenic. And I think currently right now, one of the biggest problems is that there is no kind of faction transfer system, and there's no PvE to PvP transfers. And those two things alone would have stopped probably 50 to 60% of the people I know quitting WildStar, because they had issues with either community and they wanted to transfer to another community, but they couldn't because the hardcore community was pretty harshly divided between Exile and Dominion. And if you wanted to go to Dominion, your only option was to re-roll if you were on Exile. And people don't want to, sacrifice their character that they put so much time in, or even going from PvE to PvP. So I would really like to see Carbine reverse their decision to stop players transferring from PvE to PvP servers, because I honestly see no design, the logic behind the design, whether that isn't currently possible. It may be a technology limitation, and if it is, that resources be put in to make this possible. And then some kind of faction transfer would also do loads to help the quality of life for a lot of hardcore guilds, to be able to get bodies, to be able to transfer server merges and stuff like this.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what's already been said. I'm only in a small guild of probably 30, 40 people or something, and we're currently in GA, and we're struggling to fill a roster of 20. People dropping every week. I don't think the larger guilds really have as much as a problem, because they already have the sort of reputation there. Everybody's sort of applying there. But for smaller guilds, I feel like there's lots and lots of merging going on between smaller guilds. But even then, it's still very, very difficult to find sort of the right people to fit, and people just to fill up the roster.
And another thing actually with raiding rosters is that raiding is hard. Like, it's really, really challenging in WildStar.
Yay!
And yeah, and it's a good thing for at least for the target audience, I suppose. But we did notice Enigma is an old guild from way back in World of Warcraft, and a bunch of our old guild members just gave up on raiding because it was just too hard for them. So that does reduce the potential pool of people you can recruit from, making the perception of the population even worse than it already is.
I'm sure we'll get on to talking about, the raids and dungeons and stuff like that, but props to Time Travel. Time Travel is amazing. Great guy. Have the opportunity to talk to Time Travel on numerous occasions. He would pop into top-end guild events, kind of talk about what we thought about the encounters and general bugs and stuff, and we report stuff like that. And so Time Travel is great, but I think there's a problem right now in WildStar, is that content isn't challenging, it's frustrating. When you require 40 people or 20 people to do the same 2 or 3 mechanics every 30 seconds for the entire duration of the fight, and if 1 or 2 people mess up, then they fail the encounter, that's not challenging, that's just frustrating, because someone did the math a while ago for 40 mans, and I don't remember off the top of my head, but I can give you kind of ballpark napkin figures. They said if everyone as a human being is going to mess up on 1 or 2 encounters, 1 or 2 pulls a night, and you have 40 people in your raid. Like, you're only gonna ever kill the boss like 1 out of like 200 and something attempts. And I've played video games at a top end. I'd played hardcore a lot, and the amount of attempts that I've had on bosses in WildStar when it just honestly felt like frustrating. It didn't feel like I was making any progress. It just felt purely frustrating because of a mechanic has been a lot higher than in other games. And because of this frustration level, I think it burns a lot of people out. So I play with a lot of hardcore players who have quit WildStar, have decided not to continue playing because they feel burnt out. And I think this is also goes to retention. Like, it's hard. The content is hard. And so when you have people pushing against this content and it's this as challenging as it is, people burn out really quickly. And so I think a lot of people have burnt out of WildStar because of how challenging the content is.
And then you
like-
get this downward spiral of because
Yeah.
people are leaving, it becomes more frustrating, etc.
Mhm.
That said, I would hate to see a reaction to that in terms of making everything easier, because for many of us, the draw is the difficulty level. And
Yeah.
whereas the sense of personal responsibility is fantastic, and I would encourage it, there's a danger in removing hard wipe mechanics. Let's not get too much into raids. There's a danger, though, in removing hard wipe mechanics and ending up with something that doesn't fit the original brief. There has to
Just-
be personal responsibility.
I
Just to
completely
comment
agree.
on that, just to comment on that one point, Misbah, with the concern about difficulty and things like that. My understanding from Carbine and all the time that I've spent in the Californian offices, every email that I've had with Time Travel and the devs and Mike Donatelli and all the calls that we've had, that has never come up. The raids, we are definitely. I don't think we will ever take away that challenge. Certainly, there may be things in the future which address accessibility. Maybe easier modes with lesser rewards. I don't know. Maybe that's something they're talking about. But there's definitely no talk about making the raids easier or trying to take away that challenge. We know that that's such a huge draw, and that's definitely a key foundation of what makes WildStar WildStar. I definitely think that there are more points to that. And just listening to you guys talking about the frustration, that's definitely feedback we see quite regularly. It's feedback that we pass on quite regularly as well, and I know it's being considered, and I know Time Travel works with a lot of the top guilds, and as mentioned, like, he's always in streams and watching people and things like that, so that stuff is definitely getting noticed. So
And another great response from Carbine has been the introduction, of the Protostar dungeon that will actually train people to be able to handle all this stuff instead of making it easier.
yeah, that's another thing as well. Like, I know Mike and Time Travel and a few of the other senior developers and directors, one big thing that they're quite keen on is not only making things more accessible, but also just helping players learn how to deal with because WildStar can be very different. If you're coming from your standard kind of MMO where you can just tab target, click click click, don't worry about it. WildStar is very different, and I think adding some more tutorials and things like Proto Academy, which will actually teach people about interrupting and interrupt armor and moments of opportunity and things like that. I mean, I still occasionally get players who don't know why the health bar turns purple and things like new players, and having to explain that stuff. So I definitely think that'll be a big help.
Yeah, just to chip in, I think that obviously with the addition of Protostar games, it's going to hopefully help some people. I'm afraid that it possibly could be a little too late, but only time will tell. But again, I think that maybe going from veteran dungeons straight into 20-man raid is something that probably scares quite a lot of people and has turned a lot of people away. So I think in the Nexus report, they hinted at some other possible content that could maybe be 10-man raids, something like that. But again, we'll have to see.
To be honest, for me, the bump between veteran dungeons and 20-man reigning wasn't that big, actually. So how come you feel like that, Dinkle?
Folks, if I can just step in briefly,
on.
we're getting a little bit off topic from game population, and we're probably eating into kind of our dungeon and raiding discussions later on.
Okay, well then can I just say something briefly before we move on about population? I think right now, personally, I feel like WildStar kind of struggles to understand what kind of player base they're talking to. They're constantly struggling on whether or not they should cater purely to the hardcore or try to cater to the casual. I think even from launch, this game never really purely catered towards hardcore players. Um, like a lot of the bugs and stuff, exploits. A lot of my friends, a lot of us found, everything leading up until GA, and then a lot of the stuff in GA very, very easy. Like the dungeons were very easy to breeze through. I mean, most of us got attuned within 7 days of launch. We were attuned for dungeons, we were attuned for raids, and that's fine. But I think suddenly now saying we need to prepare raids for those who took 3 or 4 months to get there, or taking 4 or 5 months to get there, like ultimately you can only hold the casual player's hand so long. Like you're never going to be able to add enough content between veteran dungeons and 20-man raids that prepares them for the brick wall that, let's say, Phageborn Convergence is. Like, it's just in no realm of reality is a casual player ever going to down that boss. Like that boss is crazy. It requires coordination from all 20 of your raid members. If one person messes up, then it's over. Like it's in my opinion more difficult than Omna was. And like no matter how many Protostar dungeons are in and how many interrupt armor, no matter how easy the UI is, it just isn't suddenly going to turn a casual player into a hardcore player. And that there speaks to me like there needs to be a goal for every group. There needs to be a goal for casual players, and that goal shouldn't be rating, because the rating is for hardcore players. And time and time again, WildStar says, we're not going to nerf this content, we're not going to nerf this content. And look at World of Warcraft. The only way that World of Warcraft has turned casual players into raiders is by introducing content like LFR, is by introducing 10-mans, by introducing easier barrier entry, and then nerfing the raids themselves very, very, very a lot. Like this expansion of Siege of Orgrimmar, like when Heroic Garrosh, the last end boss of Heroic content, was still, before he got nerfed, before all this item levels introduced, only like 0.5% of all of World of Warcraft of grass population had killed him. Like you're never gonna get the casual player to see that content. And for me, it's like heroics of World of Warcraft are normal mode of WildStar, and so trying to put steps to introduce players to this content is futile. Like they don't have the time, they don't have the patience. It's just there needs to be content available for casual players, and it's never going to be raids. And putting all this stuff in to try to make it into the raids be the content for casual players, I think it's just kind of futile.
I don't think the design goal with things like Proto Academy is to turn a casual player into a raider. From what I've seen of it, it's definitely not there. It's to allow the more casual players to enjoy things, more like, dungeon. Because a casual, you said yourselves, you guys breeze through the dungeons. That's fine, but we've definitely seen that a more casual player isn't doing that. And so I think things like Proto Academy will help them do more of that content. That doesn't necessarily mean that we'll lead them onto raiding. I agree, we definitely need to kind of supply a bit more for a casual player to do at level 50, and that's definitely something that Carbine's working on as well. One question I had for you guys, and this was something that Mizpa brought up earlier, was Carbine coming up with things to bring the community together, and this kind of links back into pulling this back into server population. We obviously all know that mega servers is something which is happening. We also know a lot of players have already transferred to servers to kind of share with everybody else. So what do you guys think that we can do as Carbine to help bring players together? Because I know not everybody likes open world group content like Scorching. Not everybody likes doing that. Is that something that we should lean towards more, or is there other ideas you think which I could pass on which would be of value?
I think first of all, just quickly.
Go,
First of all,
Crowser.
the world bosses, I think they could be like such a great point of conflict for everyone. Like imagine if the world bosses that are now like level 20 are now scaled up. They're no longer level 20, level 50. So they're scary now for low level players to try to get close. But now they're not seen as like these daunting, just gather 100 people and just smash your face against it and to ignore all the mechanics. Now they require 20 people to go and kill. Not only that, they only spawn once a week, or they only spawn only spawn once or twice a week, and they drop good loot, right? So now Dominion and Exile want to contend against these. They become focal points of world PvP, right? You want to get it up when it spawns, so you have people camping there. It becomes a focal point for the region for high-end players to give them more additional content, and it won't drop as good a raid or as good of gear as GA, but it will drop gear in between 5-man dungeons and GA, and gives people something to do, give them a focal point to meet up in the world as something playable, and then reduce the attunement stage down to you only have to kill 1 or 2 of these to get attuned. So that introduces players who aren't raiding to a raiding concept of 20-man raiding, or even 15-man raiding. Because I know for me, vanilla World of Warcraft, raiding those world bosses was kind of a memory that I will always remember. It was huge, it was cool, and they should be introduced kind of. For me, I always thought that the world bosses in WildStar are going to be this kind of focal point in the region, kind of cool stuff for people to raid around, but they never really were. They were kind of stuff that we killed for attunement and forgot about, and didn't even look at what they dropped because you just salvaged it because it was always terrible. And I think that's something that could really be developed.
Yeah, I agree though with Quota. The raid bosses really could be so much more than they are right now. And if you just add something like a public raid or some system like that, that will be amazing for those kind of things.
Yeah, building on top of that, I think people are probably going to hate me for trying to say this, but obviously vanilla World of Warcraft never had looking for group, like LFR, sorry, and I think that the dungeon finder and things like that really take away from the community in a sense that nobody's sort of typing in chat to try and find a group. Nobody's sort of really has that incentive to try and join a guild, make new friends and things like that. They can just sort of AFK in the the home city, Ilium or Thyad, and just wait for the queue to pop, do it, in, out, there, you're done. I don't know. I just feel it takes away the sense of community.
I think that I can agree with what's being said there. Automatic find your group things are convenience tools and not necessarily a solution. The biggest thing I think we're going to be dealing with here is perception versus reality. Now, I'd be very surprised if there's not a sensible number of players out there, but they're pretty fragmented in different places. Although it's probably a scary thing from a corporate perspective to do, I almost feel like we need something that says, I'm going to make up a random number. 42,017 and a half people did this week. Are you going to join them? And actually put something out there to let the community know that, hey, this stuff is real, there's stuff to join in with, and not just, hey, there's 3 people and a cat out there.
The Eve on their launcher tells you how many players are playing. Like, it's not uncommon for games. I mean, it is pretty uncommon, but I mean, it's not unheard of for games to just be like, we have this many people playing. Like, even if that number 2,000, 3,000, people aren't going to load up your login screen to log in your launcher and be like, oh man, there's only 3,000 people playing this game. No, thank you. Right? They've already committed to playing the game. They've downloaded the client. They've created something. If they're a new player and they log in and they see, oh, look, 10,000 players are playing on, or 10K, 30K, 40K people. Eventually it's going to be a positive thing, and it can never be negative. And so I think that's one of those things where you just be like, oh, there's this many people playing. Now I know. Now we don't have to create like some kind of arbitrary hub that crowds all the players into one location, so it seems like worlds are populated when they actually aren't, which then becomes more of a annoyance, because then players need to be optimized. The client needs to be optimized more because they can't handle having 40 or 50 players at one time on one screen. Lower end computers can't. So stuff like that is just a very easy way to show you how many players online, and people get to know exactly how many people are playing.
I think Steve does the same thing with games as well, and I know for a fact that I play games through Steam that have got maybe 500 people playing them, something like that, and even if it's a low number, not like, it still doesn't take away the sense of community. If it's just a really, really low number, it's probably a more tight-knit community than what you'd have if you had ridiculously high numbers.
Now, one way you might be able to introduce that, if numbers themselves are an issue, is doing something off the back of, say, monthly stats or infographics. There was something done, probably 6 months ago, that ran out all of the stats in Warcraft since inception. Now, of course, the numbers are insane. 74 billion critters killed, etc., etc., and a whole list of stats, but something that says, hey, this month, this many bosses went down, this many X's happened, this many pieces of cheese were eaten. Does it really matter? Coming up with some fun facts in and around the activity that people can go, hey, I'm part of that.
I think
Yeah,
that's a
that
good
sounds
idea.
like a. I agree. I think that in theory, if it was something that was approved, is definitely something that community can own. We can work with business teams and just kind of say, hey, guys, give us the stats for how many times people wiped on X boss this week, kind of thing, and combine that with a bunch of different things. How many times was Scorchwing killed or whatever, or how many times did people complete the new content in the Defile or whatever it happens to be. I'll definitely be putting that one through because that seems like a really sound, easy to accomplish idea.
All right, folks, we're going to call the discussion on game population to a close with that, and we are moving on to classes, which of course includes game balance in general. So, who wants to start us off?
Well, I'll kick off on classes. There's a lot of good work being done by different people for different classes. And whereas when you see patch notes, you can see an overreaching sort of span of bits and pieces. What I don't see, and maybe I'm missing it, is something that says, here is the schedule of concerns. This month is Warrior Month, next month is Spellslinger Month. Something that actually forecasts forward what's being looked at, as well as looking at the things that have just been implemented. Again, it's giving people that overarching view of, things are around and things are changing. I don't believe for a minute that the class balance for where we're at and the time the game's been around is actually bad at all. I do think there's things to do. I just think there's a little bit of a communication gap on the plans as well as what is actually happening.
Miz, but just on that really quickly, so I know that the class leads have started to do a monthly post, which is this is what's coming in the next update for this class kind of thing. Is that not deep
User
enough,
in
do you
your
feel?
channel timed out.
I'd like personally to see something that goes further forward.
Okay.
And perhaps also says, hey, the biggest focus we've got is warriors. The next biggest focus we've got is spellslingers. Engineers, we haven't forgotten about you. You're in the next one. So you've got a rolling pattern of major focal points in and around
User entered
all the
your
normal
channel.
monthly changes and everything else that's happening.
Okay.
So, for me, my kind of experience with WildStar class balance has kind of been a roller coaster of emotion. And I play a warrior. And the way we looked in Christmas beta last year and the way that we play on live is like night and day. It's so radically different. And I think a lot of people weren't expecting that. A lot of people that played warrior at quite a high level, talked in the forums, made infomercials, made posts, spreadsheets, serious min-maxers, just kind of were left scratching their head at some of the design decisions. And that's fine. I like the direction that the design leads are taking their class is totally going to be independent and of what players that actually play it, because they're playing a game. But I think sometimes it seems that the design decisions are kind of broad strokes. They're large changes, and then it takes weeks of playtime on live servers to be able to test them enough to see like what actually changed. And then for me, it felt like 2 months after launch, the design team was then just playing catch up on decisions that they'd made either at launch from beta, and they're just constantly playing catch up rather than tweaking the fine tuning of balance. Now it's like, well, we've instituted a change that has caused this domino block, and so it feels almost like the design team has lost control of the direction that they wanted their class to go in, and instead are making reactionary design decisions based on how classes are playing on live. And obviously there's going to be some of that. Like that's not going to be unavoidable. I mean, you're obviously going to put your skill set into the live environment, and players are going to do stuff that you don't or never thought was possible. But you want to have as little of that as possible, and I think right now there's just so much that it seems to me decisions that were made and then ramifications of that, the design decisions that are being completely opposite or something completely unlikely has happened whether they be, exploits that cause certain classes to be competitive, right? And so classes were underperforming, but then a patch made an exploit possible, which allowed them to be competitive. And then let's say that exploit was, or this bug was fixed, and then that made them not as competitive, and then they were, changed in an effort to make them more competitive, and then that meant that they played completely differently, like the medic. I mean, for me, it means any medic player has to have been like, I know medic players have just been a roller coaster. They're just like, what is going on with my class? And as a warrior, initially when when we were coming in from beta, we weren't a class that relied heavily on like rolling dice every single time we played, whether or not like our damage variation between perfect play and perfect RNG and gotten completely unlucky was way too high in my opinion. And so I'm just I don't know. I have lost confidence, and so I would like there to be something to bring me confidence back. I mean, right now it seems that the knob of fine tuning classes in WildStar right now seems to be just jumping around, and so.
Sure, what would bring that confidence back for you, Quota?
I think personally it would really help if the design team, had like a summit, like the warrior class lead went and they talked to those players that were parsing high on a warrior, and they asked them, what are changes you guys would like to see, or how would you guys respond to this? Because right now it seems like, stuff is put up on the PTR and we're like, oh, that sounds cool, and then it goes to live and we're like, oh, okay, well, I guess now Whirlwind is good. So it's like it just seems like so. It seems like the designers are kind of out of touch, and I would love for them to get in touch. Like, instead of just posting on the forum, have them like talk to people who parse high on their class or parse high in healings, like
Sorry, I was just going to say one project that Hugh was working on before he departed for New Shores. He was working with the community teams, and he was trying to get a similar program, like a sort of class summit for each kind of class going, looking at kind of like, top rated players in arena and, high passing players and things like that, or players who are just active in theory crafting and things like that. It's definitely something we're working on. It's something we're going to need to chat to Meerkat about now that they're kind of taking over Hugh's boots, but it's definitely still on the cards, I believe. So
I think that would help. We've got to be careful not just to pick up on those who pass high. It's got to be a broader spread than that. I think some form of sort of intermediary step between the class leads and the community. I mean, there's been games in the past that have put together, anything from MVPs through to various programs where you have class reps or other bits and pieces for each region. I think people having a focal point that is a player as part of that channel of communication and some way of electing those people is possibly a good thing again. Community participation, and people are going to have an inherent level of trust in people that are, one of us who are in on those conversations.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think
User in your channel timed out.
that obviously having the connection. I mean, you have the forums as an intermediary measure, but yeah, I agree that possibly having the people that are going to be playing the classes most, right? So obviously it kind of does make quite a lot of sense to have us be the ones giving most of our opinions out, as opposed to, say, I remember in Guild Wars 1, some of the class leads just sort of went wild and never really took any consideration as to who was playing the classes or anything like that.
I mean, it's perfect. It's totally unrealistic for anyone to think that class leads could even come close to the amount of time played that some hardcore raiders have on the class. So let's say, like, people who are parsing pretty high in Warrior in Datascape have played their class now for like 400 or 500 hours of game, probably even more than that. And the class lead of Warrior is not going to be able to, isn't playing their class, 21 hours a day like some of these players. So having that level of expertise about how your class actually plays compared to how your class was designed, I think would be very, very, would be great to see. Like, even at, like, let's say in real life at my university, we have like an intermediary between university management and the students in the student association, right? So we can elect people to the student body, and then that student body then can go and sit in on some meetings or has close discussions with people actually making decisions to make sure that we're heard. And so some kind of body like this would be absolutely amazing for instilling confidence.
I think the concern, certainly, not a concern, but the challenge there is, there's a lot of parts where it's like, okay, we need to make sure that we need to set up a system to make sure that whoever is that kind of intermediary isn't obviously using it for their own ends or whatever, and that's just figuring out the details. But it's definitely something which I think is still on the cards, and Carbine are keen on doing so.
And totally see the point that getting the right people to do that role with the right background, experience, communication
User
skills,
joined your
non-agendas
channel.
is non-trivial.
Yeah.
However, I think the benefits of such a system, however it's implemented, are huge.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
All right, folks, if we've got any more, or shall we change topic?
Looks like changing topic. Everybody's just silent.
Everyone's out of steam. All right, not a problem. We will now move on to PvE questing. This does not include raiding and dungeons, which will be their own topics coming up. So who wants to start us on questing and the leveling experience?
Okay. Questing and leveling once you're 50. I'd like some sort of way to maybe go back to zones, more incentive to go back to zones and either redo quests, or you get a costume piece for doing this sort of activity. I don't know, I've been helping my girlfriend level up, and because I finished all the zones, I literally have no incentive to go back. And even when she's questing, I have no idea what sort of quests she has on, what she needs to kill or anything like that, and I think something like that can be really complicated.
I would disagree. I don't feel like there needs to be an incentive for players who are max level to go back and do repeat content, because they've already done that content, right? I think it would be great if, let's say, there were achievements tied towards completing quests in every zone, and you got rewards based on how many achievements you got, and then that could tie in, questing content into an achievement content. But I think personally, once you get to level 50, I've done so many quests in WildStar, I don't really want to see a quest again. And I don't like dailies. I mean, I've never really liked dailies. I mean, they're a necessary evil in my opinion. But I feel like the way that they can be handled in WildStar, the systems that are already in place, can like make them not horrible. And so in WildStar, you have a ton of public events. Like they're scattered throughout the world, but almost no one ever did them when I was leveling up, because there was like 4 people in my zone at level 25 or so much. So there was never enough people, and even now, a lot of people are either max level or they're not max level. So I think the daily zones, instead of having daily quests, could just transform the whole zone experience into a public event. Like make you have like 4 or 5 different public events in the daily zones and make them daily public events. And every day you'd go there and they'd be running all the time. You could only get completion credit once a day, and you'd go there and you'd do an event. And the event could be like, the Moody's have invaded and you have to defeat the Moody's in the Northern Wastes and blah, blah, blah. So it transforms the whole questing experience that was there originally from very boring gather and, return and click that mine there, into a whole public event experience that can be very dynamic and interesting, while achieving the same thing as dailies does without the dailies.
That's sort of what I was touching on, so I'm sort of like struggling to find the words, but something that, obviously once you're 50, something that would get higher level people back into lower zones, because I think something that possibly could as well, I mean, I know we've talked on population, but if there's nobody in like a lower level zone, it kind of puts you off from leveling there because the game looks dead. So obviously, I think Guild Wars 2 did a really good approach on this by, obviously you have a set of daily tasks to do, which are set all around the world instead of just in daily zones.
Yeah, so I think I agree with what he says. Guild Wars 2 does it great. You get your daily achievement points or whatever, and you have to do various different things around the world. And WildStar could just do that instead of your dailies, or instead of a daily zone, you have to go and you have to do public events, help blah 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 with the bees infected on its farm, and instead of the bees infected on its farm being a quest, it's now a public event, and you go there and you battle bees wherever that are scaled with the scaling systems. It seems very doable with the systems that are currently in place in WildStar to make something like this happen.
And even if it's not that feasible to make an event system like that, it really will help to have multiple sets of dailies to do. Like right now, you do the same thing every single day, and that gets tiresome really quickly.
Definitely does. I think once I hit max reputation for both daily zones, I've completely stopped doing Crimson Badlands just because I don't think I want to see another dreg within my time of WildStar. I can't physically deal with it, and
Yep.
I think everybody shares that opinion. And I don't particularly mind too much Northern Waste because I think there's a good variety of quests. You're not doing the quests for about 10 minutes each. You know, you're moving on to different mobs. You're moving on to things. There's a good flow in Northern Waste, but I think possibly. I know there are people that want that carrot on a stick for dailies, but possibly with drops, bringing out new daily zones, each drop. That what they've done now with the daily zones is it's obviously just a slightly modified area zone compared to the starter zones. So I wouldn't even mind going back to maybe as a Dominion, going back to see some of the exile starter zones that are now daily zones and stuff like that. You know, something to. It wouldn't be too much work to do, but it also gives a bit of variety.
Well, from what I've seen at Gamescom, we're actually going to get a brand new zone as a daily zone and then drop 3.
Yeah, it's leveling zone churned, which I think is a perfect opportunity to tell the story through public events once again. Like, you've been through those zones, you've quested, and you've kind of sort of paid attention to the story. Most people haven't. I mean, some people pay attention to quest alt text, and I'm not one of those people. But, if you forced me to pay attention to it through an interactive and interesting event, that would be definitely something I could get behind. And it would be, you could even introduce, world PvP as an option. I don't know how you would do that, but I know the Northern Wastes. The Northern Waste is still a cross-faction zone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So by the time that I was doing the Northern Waste dailies, like, people weren't PvPing, but when the game first launched and you went to the Crimson Badlands, that was like hotbed for world PvP. People PvP'd there all the time, albeit the population was a little bit higher. But I think there's elements there, to introduce the Exile versus Dominion story a lot more in these zones with an event that would force you to pit you against. Maybe the way to do it is like, instead of direct PvP, do it like they do in the research facility, the containment R12 event, where each side is racing against each other, and if you win, you get bonuses. So you'll have like an exile event, and you'll have a Dominion event in the zone, and then whoever completes it first gets a bonus for eventually going to like a boss in the middle or something like that. And then you could be very faction.
That could be cool. You could have like a something pop up on your screen if you were in one of the daily zones, kind of like the what is it, the Meteor thing in Farside. So obviously everybody would start at the same time, and then it's sort of like a rush to get to the end.
Just to go back to a point you guys were talking about earlier, concerning like the more public events instead of just kind of dailies and things like that, and introducing the story through the public events and things. It will be definitely. I'd be interested to have this conversation again after the next drop with the Defile. I think there'll be a lot of stuff in there which it'll be good to know what people think of that basically once it's out and once people have tried it, for a couple of weeks and see how it goes. So. Unfortunately, I just can't talk too much about it at the minute.
That tease.
Yeah.
I will say this, that the contract drop to the Blighthaven had some really cool quests in it. Questing to that zone was pretty awesome. The whole lead up to the Firebird person.
Yeah, Scorchwing. Yeah.
Scorchwing Firebird was awesome. I mean, even if it was gated behind group content, forced you to take people in. Her storyline is Jusera's storyline is pretty awesome. That we know of right now. So I think when the story is cool, you're really WildStar is such a great and expansive lore, but at the same time, I feel like Northern Waste to me, maybe that just speaks to the way that the quests maybe be designed. When I was doing Northern Waste quests, it was like, oh god, I gotta do my dailies again. This is horrible. And I kind of reminiscing on World of Warcraft, doing my dailies every day for 4 or 5 months before I was exalted with stuff, and you're just like, can it please end? Please. Because like you just go into autopilot, and I feel like content should be it's why you play WildStar is because it's fun, but the activities you do in WildStar you do because they're rewarding. And so I feel like right now the rewards you get from some of the content that you do in WildStar, specifically the quests, could be vastly improved. Like the daily quests, you are gated behind like a 28-day grind for like pennies that you get from the vendor. So if you're a character that's actively raiding in G8, there's literally no reason for you to do the dailies. Like you could probably even get better gear from the dungeons. So there needs to be like an actual incentive besides just like really expensive hoverboards and mounts, because like that floats some people's boats, but for the most part, it doesn't.
Ability points now.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that is a nice switch actually. Amp and ability points gives a reason to do things, but I mean, I'm
but it's not really a reward. I don't
Of-
feel that content that is necessary is a reward. Now this is turning with the amp and ability points that are come in now. This is turning stuff that's like logical character progression to I need those, now I have to do them, right? So it's never it was before it was a choice. You had a choice to do these dailies. The choice was you could get items from the vendor. Now it's like I am required to do these dailies because I need to get the stuff from the vendor. So it turns it almost from a chore into a chore that you have to do, right? Before it was a chore that you had a choice to do, and now it's like so
I think the issue with that, though, is in one hand, if we say we want rewards that are meaningful, and then things are made available that aren't meaningful, then as a community, we're saying, well, we have to do these things. Now, I personally agree that you do have to do these things, but I think the moment that any reward is meaningful to your character or your progression, if you're focused or a completionist or you're focused on performance, of course you have to do it. I really don't care if I have 5,000 hoverboards in 74 shapes and 16 and a half colors. But if I can get 0.05% in any one stat for anything at all, I'm doing it.
yeah, but let's say you were given a situation where you needed to get amp ability points, but now there was, 50 possible ways to get those, right? I can make the honest choice that these awards are still meaningful, regardless of where they are, what content they're gated behind, whether or not I needed to get 6,000 achievement points and I get an ability point or an amp point, or I needed to complete specific achievements and I get ability amp points. To me, it seems like when you have to do it because there's no alternate choices of progression, it becomes a chore. So if to get the max amount of ability points and amp points, you need to do currently all the things that are available in game. Right, you need to do the rep grind, you need to do the dungeon grind when it's introduced to get the gold and the ratings, and you need to do various other things. Those things because there isn't like 50 available places where you can get amp and ability points. You don't have that choice going, okay, it was required for me to get these amp and ability points, but I can then now make the choice what content I want to, which progression I want to go through. Right now, if I'm a PvPer, and I want to get my amp and ability points, I'm forced to quests, right? I can't get all of them through PvP.
I'm not sure if I agree with that, and maybe I'm missing something here. Obviously, when the amp and ability points were rolled out, there was always going to be more changes in the future because the time gating worked out to be something like post a year on the current flow. Whereas you can do these things, and as I see it, they're geared to push you through different areas, different content, different game mechanics that you might or might not be exploring. There is, of course, always the answer of I am going to get elder points and I'm going to buy them. So there is more than one route. I do agree that multiple routes is a good thing, but I don't feel it's a case of, well, I now have to do activity X because it's the only way to do stuff, because I believe there is a choice.
Yeah, but there isn't a choice. Let me just clarify what I was saying. Like, to currently get the max ability points and max amp points, you were forced to do all of the choices. They're not choices. all of the
That's not true.
available
You
play.
can get all of them through the Elder Gems.
Yeah, you can get all of them through Elder Gems, but then you'll have to spend
But you
8
have to
months
wait.
getting. So let's say you're a player, right, who needs to get stuff done. You're min-maxing your character, and you want to get all of those in the shortest amount of time possible.
Yeah,
If you want
there's
to
the
do
trick.
that,
The
you
shortest amount of time possible.
okay, yeah, but even if that, I am a firm believer that players should be choosing what content they go into. If I'm a hardcore player, I look at the requirements. I've chosen to make that route, and I go into that. I'm a hardcore PvPer. I should be able to safely play the game without ever having to kill a mob if I want to, because that is
If
the
I extend that argument, Quota, are we not, though, as a community, going to turn around and say, well, there's now 50 choices of how I can do this, but this one's the most efficient, so now I'm
well,
going
yeah,
to
and then
ignore
but that
49
that's
others.
another choice, right? So then, if I'm the player who needs to get it done as quick as possible, I'm then choose to go through that route. But now if I'm the player who only wants to get them through PvP content, I can only do PvP content. But not
But
only
it's
that,
already the possibility.
it allows you to create more content there by not necessarily forcing players, but introducing interesting gameplay through achievements that they wouldn't have otherwise done. But now those are purely fun, they're purely choices that they're making. But these other things are, it's like I say again, when I play the game, it's for fun. I should never have to do an activity in game that I am actively regretting, because I feel like that is a failed game design.
I'm with you on the argument of choice. I do feel there is already some choice, and we're perhaps being a bit harsh in discounting that it isn't actually there. The danger is, though, if that time and effort in creating more system and alternate advancement routes is made, these
Yeah, but
things become
I'm not saying
live.
you
These
need
things
to
become
create more
live.
content.
These
I'm
things
saying that
become
all you
live
need
in
to
the game.
do is add
Gentlemen,
rewards.
if I can just interrupt briefly, please don't talk over each other. Let's keep it civil here. Let everyone have their chance to speak when they're speaking. Thank you.
So if we do put all these things into the game, the danger is that there will be an optimal route. And I question whether that would be a good use of time and mechanics if a big enough proportion of us, and I'll be guilty of this, will just select the optimal route.
Is it not fair saying then that instead of having specific routes to get these amp and ability points, that perhaps it might be worth looking into maybe raising the Elder Gem cap per week? Because instead of having these specific routes that you have to go down, with the Elder Gems, you can do anything in the game and still get rewarded for it.
I still disagree with the concept that if I have 50 different options, but one of them is more optimal, taking that is still a choice. But if I only have one option, then the same argument doesn't apply. Then we might as well get rid of 49 other ones if you're only going to ever choose one. Because there are players in this game who... Sorry, just give me a second. Continue on without me, I'll be back in 5.
But yeah, we've been rambling about character progression for a while now, but I believe we were talking about PvE,
Weston.
actually.
Yeah.
I think there's a natural overspill in terms of questing and elder gameplay outside of raiding is something you do to progress your character. I think I'm all for choices. The difficulty is making choices meaningful without, and you made an excellent point in a chat channel that I'm not sure everyone can see, Jared. You pointed out the Crime Lords of White Veil. There was an optimal route. Therefore, the optimal route is now chosen by 99.9% of groups. I'd actually like to know what some of these other things actually do if you select them. I've never yet selected them.
Yeah. I think I did one just for shits and giggles, but...
What's interesting on that is that the different paths and the different adventures end up have different rewards as well. Like if you do pick a different path, you can have different loot, and it's always baffled me. Like, you know, I remember when people kind of saying like, oh, you know, going through Crime Lords or doing this and this thing hasn't dropped and stuff, and I'm like, well, yeah, have you tried going a different route, or are you just doing the same thing over and over and over again? So
Yeah, but that's
it'll be
not
interesting to see
communicated,
that.
though.
No, this is something which should have been made much more clear. It definitely was something that which we tried to push throughout, like on a community scale, but that isn't the same as actually having something in game saying, did you know that if you pick different paths you can get different rewards? And I think that's something that we need to add.
I must confess, I did not know that, so if I don't know it, I'm sure a lot of people don't know it.
It's something which I do think needs to be made clearer. I'm not sure if it has specifically like completely different loot, or it just assigns different drop values. Yeah.
The irony of it, right, is that when they made the patch that allowed gold ratings, that loot to be spread across all. It actually fixed this. So when you do crime lords, white
okay.
belts, choose a specific path, you now have the option to get all of the loot that could potentially drop. And it was not a lot of loot. It was like 1 or 2 pieces were specific to each individual path. And one of the paths were actually bugged for the longest time. It was impossible to complete.
Yeah.
The irony, the funny thing is, like, there's a person in chat that actually said this, is that Crime Lord wasn't the most optimal, it was the only one that worked. So Protostar like had like a 50% chance to bug, because I was one of the people that like found out these most optimal routes in these ventures. Crime Lord or Protostar had like a 50% chance to bug, and then the on the firefighter quest part of that, when you're doing that there was various other events that would just bug, and so we found the most optimal way to go through the dungeon without it bugging, and that was the one that people use now. And it was like, there was also kind of tweaks that were made to make it even faster, but I think that this is not a bad thing. Like, you have the choice there. If you're gonna go through and you're gonna be like, I kind of want to change a pace, I want to do a different route this time, then you know that maybe I shouldn't queue into pugs, because pugs are only ever going to do it this way. And so then I can't blame the pugs because they want to do it the most optimal way, because maybe the guy only has 20 minutes before he goes to work, right? And so he wants to do it the fastest way possible because he needs to get to the content, because some reward is gated behind that content. I think that's perfectly fine. Like, I think the argument that we can't ever have choice because there will always be a most optimal route it shoots itself in the foot, because that's not necessarily true. Like, people are going to choose the most optimal route, but even if 9 times out of 10 people choose the most optimal route, that doesn't discount the fact that there should be choice. And I will reiterate, when I log in to play WildStar, I want to purely have fun. And if I ever do something that's not fun, I feel like the designer has failed their role, because the designer should ultimately try to design every system in the game to be fun to use, and there shouldn't be a quote-unquote necessary evil. Like, that word should never be used in game design. It's like a game, for God's sakes. It's not like you're filling out your taxes.
All right, folks, and with that, we're going to draw questing and leveling to an end. Next up, PvP, Battlegrounds, and Arenas. Who's jumping in here?
All right, I'll jump in. Obviously, I think everyone who's in here is probably more geared towards PvE endgame raids. Correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, but now that I'm 50, in Genetic Archives, obviously I've not been spending quite a lot of time, leveling up, because I've already done that, and now I'm looking for things to spend my time on. So I have been trying out PvP. Some of the changes to gear seem fine. Obviously, I'm not a hardcore PvPer, so I wouldn't be able to express that sort of knowledge because I just don't know. What I can say, though, I was talking to some guildmates today that what came in drop 2, what battleground, Dagestan Pass. The fact that if you queue up for Dagestan Pass, I normally queue up for Dagestan and Walatiki. Obviously, Dagestan Pass is a 15-man battleground, and Walatiki is 10-man. So obviously, I'm not sure on how the actual queue works, but we were assuming in our conversation today that because Walatiki is obviously the 10-man, that's always going to get filled up first, and there's not an equal an equilibrium between whether the queue picks Walatiki or another thingy, just based on who's queued for it, not on the amount of people you need.
I'm going to chip in here briefly. I stream nightly, and I spend an hour PvPing every night through Battlegrounds. I always queue random, and the likelihood is I'm going to be playing Walatiki. Halls of the Bloodsworn is maybe a quarter as rare, and then maybe once a week I'll get a Daggerstone Pass hit. There certainly does need to be something done about the queuing mechanics.
I think it works on a priority system.
Well, maybe even just some kind of bonus for queuing for certain kind of maps. That doesn't require any particular change. It just kind of makes people want to queue for the other maps, as it were.
So I know, and I'm pretty sure that Persistent World Lewis B is doing an interview with Kevin Lee tonight as well. So there'll probably be some really cool information coming out of that. But I do know that Kevin said recently on the forums that they are looking at doing PvP dailies. So that's definitely something that can be factored in. So even if it is just, not necessarily just a bonus, even if it is just like a hey, complete sabotage, kind of daily, that will hopefully open it up. I will speak to Kevin because for some reason, I have a feeling that theory about because Walatiki only needs 10 people, it fills up first. Therefore, everybody's always going to get into Walatiki kind of early. I have a feeling that could be true, but it's something I'd need to check with Kevin. But I'll definitely raise it up with him and see if we can get that looked into. And mention that Walatiki is just always happening, and we need to look into more bonuses. So.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
cool.
and I think people won't mind having a slightly longer queue just to have an equal distribution of the battlegrounds. And make the queue a bit longer so you give the chance for the other battlegrounds to fill up as well.
Yeah, and if you're getting extra rewards from it for whatever reason, whether it's kind of like a rally cry bonus, whatever, or a daily or whatever, that should hopefully make up for the slightly longer wait maybe as well.
Yeah.
I think an interesting change could be made where things like War Plots and Daggerstone, instead of requiring a certain amount of players, have a minimum amount of players that can join. So War Plots could potentially be 10 versus 10, so you'd have a persistent instance with minimum required of players, and then players could join as the game goes on, and then get prestige scaled based on that. So let's say hypothetically you have a War Plot instance that starts only with 10 versus 10, but people as they queue as mercenaries into the system could join over time, and then eventually the game would end. But players that joined, let's say 15 minutes into the game, would get less prestige as players that joined when the game started. But this would allow games of War Plots to go much more regularly, or games like Daggerstone Pass, if they had like a minimum requirement of 10 players but could scale up to 15, then they would be placed at the same priority as Walatiki Temple.
I agree with the change to War Plots, especially with the one that's coming where it's turning it into 30. I think I'm not sure if I read it on the forums, but it could be an interesting idea to just have sort of default War Plots where you don't have to have a guild. Although I'm not sure if this is coming actually. You don't have to have a guild. You don't have to have a party set up for War Plots. Obviously, you can just join, and the War Plot's already set up for you. It's a balanced battleground, so it's basically just 30 versus 30 battleground without customization.
So on that note, would something like almost like a practice battleground, like it's basically already set up, there's 2 pre-built bases, it probably wouldn't be persistent like on all the time, it'd probably be something like a BG where you have to queue for it, but where you can basically just join, it will randomly assign you to a team, it's fully built, with already placed things in place, just so that people get a feel of some of the things that War Plots can do and a feel for the map. Do you think that that's something that could work?
Yeah,
I think that would be
definitely
a huge help. It'd be nice to randomize some of the plugs in there from game to game. You can make it a Protostar training complex. Help us find our incendiary devices. Don't blow your legs off, or whatever it happens to be. A comment was made earlier, and it's a mechanics question, I guess. I like the idea in principle of being able to start a War Plot or something with a smaller number and growing it, but I would question how well that would work in terms of the placement and build phase. So having something like the Protostar training complex would be an awesome way to let people see it.
I think almost piggybacking on that, I think with my original assumption where you'd have like a minimum amount and that would scale, would work beautifully with like a unranked training War Plot, right? Where it has preset, it maybe even has different War Plot plugs than the regular one. It has like Protostar training ones that may be scaled down or maybe easier to really introduce the players playing War Plots to this concept of like what a War Plot actually is, because I feel like right now you almost like are jump right into it when 40v40, you don't know what any of the plugs are. Not only that, you don't really know where to get all the plugs. Like some of the plugs drop off world content, some of the plugs drop in dungeons, and so it's kind of like, well, I don't really know where to get it. There's not really kind of like a path that I'm set on, whether I only get the plugs through PvP content, PvP back. So having a training ground where people can jump in with like even less players and you just kind of mess around and be like, oh, that's what a war plot is. Oh, this is what people were talking about when they're saying plugs. Might be a really good thing to like kind of introduce people to the concept of war plots.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe something that I don't know if has been considered already, but I really want something in PvP that's similar to, say, an Alterac Valley in vanilla. Just something like that is a really big battleground. Obviously, we've talked about. I think Warplots probably would be similar, but obviously without the customization, but with specific sort of objectives. So you take out this base, you take out that boss, or just something like that.
The mechanics of that are really quite awesome. Oh, my foot pedal is spamming bees all over the chat. Hang on a second. Fixed. That's a really nice idea. The mechanics there are great. Anything like that, though, it would be good to make sure it has a finite end. I remember those battles lasting more than 24 hours.
You know what would be fun, just as a concept, for a training war plot? That eventually, if it's a protostar war plot, they spawn a raid boss. And that becomes the end objective.
Accidentally, of course.
Yeah.
Wait,
I don't
that
know.
wasn't supposed to get out?
I think war plots really were plagued with the idea that it was so much PvE content for PvPers, right, with a generator versus generator, that like having a boss would be complete. It wouldn't even be a PvP zone. Like, why would you kill the other players? Like, the reason why Alterac Valley, the reason why AB, why Warsong Gulch lasted so long is because ultimately the PvP landscape of Vanilla WoW was about farming honor kills. That's how you got ranks. So like you were incentivized for making your Alterac Valley last until people had like 1,000, 1,200 honor kills before you end the game. Like you weren't incentivized to actually end the game. And obviously, look at the landscape now in World of Warcraft. You want to end Alterac Valley as fast as possible because you get the most honor per hour doing that. So if you had a situation where you did war plots because the end boss dropped PvP gear, then you'd just be doing it for that reason.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that boss should drop PvP gear at all. I'm saying that in order to put a hard cap on when the match ends, you have the raid bosses come out, which is entirely possible in war plots, because you can summon raid bosses within.
No, just have it like.
And then in a training one, just have the regular kind of ending where you destroy the enemy generator. That's fine, but then just for funsies, because no one in a practice war plot, no one's going to have permission to spawn a raid boss. So you just kind of throw in Protostar, just releasing them if it kind of gets towards the end of a long match. Just more for flavour than anything else. But then make whoever kills if kind of one team manages to take down the raid boss as well, have that as a winning condition, just for funsies.
You could tweak that slightly, sorry, Dinkle, and actually have the team that wins the plot have a crack at this thing. Would just seem to be a nice twist on it if they can do it within a time limit.
I was just thinking that instead of having just Protostar be the ones spawning the boss, is there not a way to... I don't know if there is, but possibly having each team have tickets that obviously build up, and then there's either someone who you talk to who you have a selection to spawn things in this war plot. So say the team gets 1,000 banana points or whatever, they can go talk to an NPC in the base, and then they can select what they want to do. So 1,000 for spawning a red boss, something like that.
The problem there, I think, is going to be the unstructured nature of a group if it's based on random queues. So who gets to make the choice? Is there any hierarchy in the group? Am I spending my personal banana points? It's a nice idea, but it's how would you allocate the responsibility and the ownership of it, so to speak? It works well for structured groups.
Yeah, and that's the entire idea. Like I've seen Jen was kind enough to show us the EU team through a couple of warplot tests when we were last visiting. And the way that it would normally work is, your warband leader or your war party, I think they're called the war party leader, has that permission to do it, and it costs the resource in the game. So I don't know if there'd be a way to do that. I think it would have to be something like a random, like if the match has gone on X minutes or enemy generator is at X points, spawn boss for the practice one. I mean, obviously, I think that'd be the only way they could probably do it. I mean, maybe not. It's definitely an idea to. I mean, I'm going to pass the idea to Kevin and say, look, the guys really like this idea. Is this something that we can do, and what would be the best mechanics to kind of make it work? So,
I guess where this is actually coming from really is because I've not played a.
but that's
plot.
exactly it. No, people don't know
Yeah.
because it's hard to get into, and 40v40, and it's just trying to get the war parties and stuff as well. I mean, there is a method for joining as a mercenary, so you don't actually have to be part of a war party, but it's still pretty difficult because if there's nothing for mercenaries to queue up with.
I think I actually had a chance to test war plots with Jen and Drew from WildStar Radio NA. He got me in, and for the most part, I just generally had no idea what was going on. Just kind of running around and killing stuff. But I think war plots at a whole need to be PvP centric. So I think ideas like introducing, generators, spawnable bosses, these things are just like PvE flavor in PvP, where people kind of just want to be playing against other players, and it's not necessarily playing against other players. So I think maybe adding a mechanic to war plots, like if you just kill enough of the opposing team, it ends. Like every player is an energy source, and when the Dominion or one of the other team's energy source equals 0, they no longer have enough energy to power their war plot, right? And so games that are just fought over control over middle over and over and over again don't end after like 5 hours when one team finally manages to break through, but they're actually ending when enough people are getting killed, and then this makes people play defensively because they only have a finite number of points.
It might have been an early version I saw of war plots, because I'm sure that there was definitely a mechanic like that. There was definitely a mechanic of that you basically,
I remember this
you
well, yeah.
can just
Upkeep.
kill. I think maybe, I don't know. The problem is that my issue was that a lot of the war plot stuff I saw was pre-launch and actually pre a number of big changes that I know Jen made just before the launch of the game. So I'm not entirely sure if that's still there, but I know that was definitely something which was. There was definitely a mechanic in there where you could just kill enemy players, and if you were playing, doing that, and at the same time defending your gubs, then you were okay. But yeah, not quite sure on that one. I'll have to check.
All right, folks. If there's nothing more for any more on battlegrounds, arenas, war plots, etc.
For me.
Then we are going to change topic, and we are moving on to raiding.
I'll swap my chair for a soapbox.
Maybe that I'm thinking of arena content or WS Coinstar actually. Anyway.
So who wants to start us off on the topic of raiding in WildStar?
Okay, I'll. There was a area which was kind of hybrid between is it raiding or is it questing, and that is that of attunements. And with the recent changes to attunements, do we feel, everyone here, that people are going to be prepped accordingly for transitioning into a raid environment if they've gone through the new attunement process, which of course removes the time cap?
Honestly, I don't want to sound elitist or anything like that, but I don't think so. I think that getting bronze is probably too easy to say, maybe. I mean, I'm not... Silver is, I think, a good medium. I think gold, telling people to get gold would be, alienate so many people that it would have been too much. But on the other hand, I think bronze is possibly too little.
Yeah, I agree there, and there's something else going on as well, because when we were doing our achievements for silver, when a lot of people were complaining, there were also a lot of bugs in the dungeons that prevented you from getting silver, because a single bug can ruin your entire dungeon attempt. And most of them have been fixed now. The dungeons are brilliant now. They work really well, and, well, we of course practice as well, so we're consistently getting silvers now. But I also feel like for new people, it will be a lot more feasible to get silver in a relatively sane amount of time.
I think LFG probably plays another part in this as well, that people are going into LFG expecting to be getting silver or something, that which I think is possibly unrealistic.
I think it's fine for it to be unrealistic, but that's got to be communicated. I'm not sure whether the generic reaction to achieving silver and trying to make it more accessible, stroke easier, not quite sure how to phrase that one, has ended up with it being from my perspective, a bit of a negative decision.
So, I think a lot of people are like, don't nerf attunements, we're going to get so many people in a raid that are bad and will ripe us in GA, but the honest truth of it is that when we finished our attunement stage, we started selling silver attunement runs to players, because I don't know if you're able to do it anymore, but you could run with 5 players to the very end before the very end boss, and then you could switch people out, and you could then kill the end boss, and then the people that were switched out would get the whole dungeon on silver award, right, and get their attunement stage. So
I think
we were selling. It probably still works like that. We were selling attunements for like a very long time to a lot of people that are raiding in GA or were raiding in GA, and some of those players were brilliant. They just didn't have the group to get in there. Some of those players weren't so good, but like the same parallels can be drawn between like World of Warcraft, right? You literally need nothing to get into World of Warcraft raids today. People still get in. There's guild for those people. It's less about is the people ready for the content. I think it's more about as your guild, how big of a skill disparity are you allowing to let into your guild? Because there are going to be people who aren't as good as some of the other people in your guild, sure, but you want to keep that skill disparity as small as possible, because if it's huge, you have one player that's always wiping you, the other 19 players are going to get frustrated. So I think, honestly, they could even do away with the attunement step. Players, wouldn't be prepared for raids at all, and they'd still be fine. They would just need to find the appropriate community for them.
Yeah.
So for me, this attunement change, just whatever, right? Make it easier. Who really cares?
I think I agree with that completely, that whether people are attuned or not, they're still going to be getting filtered out of once they get into raids. So like you say, if somebody is wiping every time, even if they got the attunement themselves, or they got boosted through it, or they paid for it, the guild is probably still going to, have somebody in to replace them. So I don't know.
It seemed to step away from the design mechanic we see in a lot of places, which is a progressive series of content steps that teach you what you need for the next step. And that's something that they've done really well in the leveling curve, and just seem to remove at that point.
Something was also
Okay.
missing from the whole attunement steps is actually the gear progression as well, because of the whole crafting thing being a little bit too powerful, so to say. People
Who's less
only went
that?
to the dungeons for the attunement. There was no reason, really, except for helping other people, to go back.
I think that's probably going to get addressed in the upcoming drop
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true today. Even Dungeon, some of the raid rewards are not perhaps as shiny as we'd like them to be, but we know there are changes coming to that loot drop balance.
Yeah.
There's no point harping on about what's there now, other than I'll make a statement and see if anyone disagrees with it. My understanding is that the changes are designed to reward you fairly for the effort you've had to put in, and to put you in a position whereby raid-related drops are going to be the optimal drop for the PvE content that we're attempting, that they will replace crafted drops unless we can find a way of needing equivalent raid progression to get items to do more crafting.
So I think that this is, like, the fix ultimately is just going to be increasing item levels that drops, because some dungeons we're dropping gear like Grims, we're dropping gear like Hunter Helpless Scope that were item level about 1800 compared to raid drops where some weren't as high of an item level as others. To be fair, I think it's more systemic than this. Things like grit and armor on gear actually affect the stat budget of those pieces. So without getting like too technical, if I have a cloth piece, I actually have more stats on it at the equivalent item level as a heavy piece, just because I have left armor, and armor's taken as part of the stat budget, as well as grit is also taken as part of the stat budget, which I have complained to time travel as well. I have written lengthy emails to the econ team saying this is horrible, stop forcing players to take grit, it's not going to work, just increase their base HP pulls. So like I think this is more to do with the way that stats are budgeted on gear and less to do with the actual item rewards being too low, because I think there are actually like bugs. Bosses do drop. Some bosses I think in GA drop item level like 2700 stuff compared to other bosses that drop like 1600, and you're just like, well,
Yeah, it's a big scale.
that can't be like right. Like that just doesn't seem right to me. That seems like an honest like a bug, or it's not intended, or something didn't get through like the final pass they made on the squishes or something like that. But back to dungeons and raids, that I think that the content needs to be changed so that it's not. I honestly think the difficulty curve needs to be reduced. Currently, right now, you go from, let's say, adventures into dungeons, and it's like you basically hit like a wall. It's not like a gradual curve of progression. It's like you go from being able to easily do like Crime Lords of White Veil into doing SSM, and you're like, oh my god, some of these bosses are like really quite hard, really quite difficult. Like the difficulty ramp, in my opinion, just from adventures to dungeons is huge. Like it's a leap, and then you
Is
go
that
from
necessarily
dungeons.
a bad thing?
I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think that the curve from dungeons to rages, it's much nicer. So the first boss, X89, is quite easy. You have mini bosses you can farm, and I think that's a lot nicer curve. But I think the transition from adventures to dungeons, specifically when you're only doing progression through play unorganized as group like pugs and the queue, I think a lot could be done to either make adventures have a difficulty ramping scale that puts them in line with dungeons, so it's a gradual shift rather than players. Because like to be honest, people just I don't know what the casual player does now. I can't speak for that, but if you queue, you just don't queue for dungeons. There's no point to do them. Like it's frustrating. You wipe, you spend too much money on repairs, and you never get anything good enough to justify. When you can just do adventures, it's cheap. You barely ever wipe. It's pretty much guaranteed gold, and even if it's not, the way that the gearing changes and the gear drops have changed, like it's always worth it. But for me, it just seems like dungeons are interesting. They're there for a hardcore player. They can be interesting. You know, gold is actually very, very hard to do, very frustrating sometimes. And I think that's interesting, rewarding content. But for the casual player, I see no point for them ever to do dungeons. So in my opinion, they should just remove them from the attunement step and just let players go straight into raids.
I would be very nervous of that as a raid leader evaluating someone new. Of course, you're going to take people on runs.
Well, you're just not
but
going to invite them
you're
to your
gonna want
guild.
Well, actually, we will. We're going to want to invite everyone and train them up and make them better. But I'd like to be able to reliably look at them and see what is the baseline. Well, where is someone today and what are they capable of? And I like the previous attunement process for that. But let's let people jump in and then we'll get back into other topics.
I think that the gear that people have definitely plays a vital role in the perceived difficulty level of dungeons to adventures. So I think if in drop 3, you know, with the changes to itemization coming, I think that possibly could address issues of the difficulty curve, maybe.
It will indeed funnel people into the right progression tree. Like people completely skip Sanctuary of the Sword Maiden normal these days, but now with the quests they're introducing and with the gearing changes, that might actually become a thing again while leveling. Like when you hit 50, you first do Sword Maiden before you move on, or maybe after the veteran adventures.
We talked about changing content to make some of the hard wipes less frustrating. I'll throw an example out there and just go, well, how would you change this? Kuralak eggs. You know, that is a mechanic that people have to get right. It's something that I like the concept of it, but I can't see how you would change it other than having, 16 at the high end rather than 32, for example.
That's how I would
8 at the
change
high
it.
end rather than 16, etc.
Just introduce the eggs later onto the fight. Problem solved. And
Go on. I think with the eggs on Krolak, thing that made a difference between light and day for me is using a add-on called Zin Marker, which allows you, just like World of Warcraft, to place marks on the ground or beacons of light where people can stand. I think it's It's partly due to the design of the room, because if you look around the room, there's nothing to give you an indication of where you are unless you're paying like
The
A
amount
lot
of
of
times I
concentration
turned
to your
around.
minimap.
Yeah.
Everything looks the same, so it's very, very difficult in order to get yourself in the right position for the eggs and etc. etc.
One thing I will note though that would like we had a running joke for the longest time that our guild leader didn't understand the concept of north, east, south, and west. And we used directional markers in that fight, so like so that everyone would go to the same pillar when she was doing her like room wide AOE thing that I don't remember the name of. We'd say like north pillar, south pillar, and stuff like that. If Carbine added like north, south, east, west to the mini map, oh my god, it would save like so many people trying to figure out where north, south, and east and west actually are.
Have it on static. There is actually a north and south little indicator on.
Is there?
Yeah,
But like,
there
because
is.
it was just like a circle there, like I didn't really notice. Like trying to find your orientation in that room is like a complete and utter nightmare. Everything looks exactly the same.
Yeah, it really is.
It's just like pillar, 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 pillar. The boss could be facing wherever. But I know for on the flip side, right, a lot of guilds have problems, and it's a very close enrage timer. Like you can actually break the encounter if you kill it too quickly. You don't get the last egg phase. Like we've killed it in the 4 egg phase before, and I know other guilds like Enigma US has killed it that fast. I think Voodoo's also killed it that fast. Like several guilds in the world, and even so now, like I was talking about. Like this is a very real issue that people don't really necessarily know about. The idea of stat scaling in WildStar is completely and utterly crazy. Compared to the gear that you first get in, let's say, Adventures, compared to the gear that you get in Datascape, it's like a 300, 400% stat increase, which is crazy. Like if you imagine Datascape as a second tier and GA as a first tier, we're already getting into numbers where people are pulling like 14, 15k DPS. And then when the rune chases are introduced, I went on the personal test server, or the public test server, excuse me, and did all my gear up into like an ideal best in slot genetic archives, and I gained like 1.8k attack power as a warrior, which is like double my attack power. Like just to put it into perspective, like a lot of people see that as a problem and may not realize, but a lot of the bosses in genetic archives had their HP increased because they would break if they were killed too quickly. And right now, if you're in Datascape and you go back and you clear, if you, let's say your whole raid's in Datascape gear and you go back and clear genetic archive, you will break probably every encounter in that raid. So I think something needs to be done about the way that stats scale in WildStar, because right now, a year from now, let's say 2 or 3 more raid drops, like it's going to be ridiculous. People are going to be doing like 25k, 30k DPS. And you know, it took World of Warcraft like 2 expansions to get there, and it's taking WildStar like 2 content drops.
Yeah,
so,
they're going to do a stat crush every expansion or something.
Yeah, so that's something that the Dying team like really needs to get a grip on, because I think these sweeping changes, like the rune changes, are nice in theory. They're just love across the board for every class. They're just general buffs for all DPS, but like it's going to create more problems in the long run.
I guess I'd ask the question: is there a design plan around stat scaling and a longer-term view?
Yeah, so it might be useful for us to hear something from the econ team, which is probably, in my opinion, one of the most elusive teams of WildStar. Like I've never heard, they'd never come out and talk on the forums. If they could make a write-up like in response to World of Warcraft stat squish, this, like if someone could make like a cute little graph that shows the scaling of WildStar stats, it would be like insane curve. And we'll just like post it on the forums, and then the econ team could reply to that and be like, "Don't worry, we have a plan, guys. We're not gonna have to squish the stats in a year." So.
I know that the econ team are starting to post a little bit more. I mean, the big post about all the itemization changes coming in the next drop was probably the biggest info drop that they've done in a while. They've got some fresh blood in there, so it shouldn't be too hard to try and coax some of them out and get them posting. So we can work on that.
All right, folks. With that, we're going to switch topics again, or rather maybe it's more expanding the topic. We're moving on to dungeons. as their own topic. Obviously, if people don't have too much to say on dungeons, you can keep on the grading track if you so wish. But dungeons, who's going to start us?
Well, I'm going to throw something out there. I have to say, based on chasing sort of, silvers and golds, these are some of the most fun dungeon mechanics I've ever run into in an MMO. And I'm slightly baffled by the amount of negativity that they actually receive. Is it just a case of they're pitched at a level that are beyond sort of truly casual consumption, or do people actually find the dungeon experience not enjoyable?
I think you hit the nail on the head there with, I think them aimed at more, well, I don't like using the word hardcore, but, sort of advanced MMO players as opposed to the casual person who'd probably more catered to sort of going around doing a couple of quests, etc., etc.
I think what's important to note is that when you have content gated behind time, like for us, when we were doing our first silver dungeons and trying to get those silver medals, we were skipping everything we could. We were finding every little bug in the terrain that we could use a movement skill to get across to give us more time. And playing like that is like very few people actually want to play their content like that, rushing through, seeing very little, not exploring the lore, barely reading the quests, and just doing everything as fast as possible. Like that kind of system, and that's why this is why I think this attunement change where people can just do bronze is great, because now it allows people to go in, do the dungeons for a point, because like as we said, the gear is not enough incentive for people to go to dungeons, but now they do have this incentive doing attunement, but now they can explore this content at their own leisure, when before they couldn't. They were forced to see the content a very specific way that they didn't find fun.
I think that's slightly dangerous territory. I do entirely see where you're coming from. But is it really the expectation that people will find, as you phrased it, every single sort of movement glitch or everything else, and then balance the game around that? I mean, I actually banned people in Enigma from using any exploit in a silver. They weren't allowed to, full stop. And that's our stance with anything in the game.
Well, obviously, like these exploits and stuff get fixed because they're exploits. Like I'm not saying like, oh no, you should have this is emergent gameplay, people finding exploits, but instead I think that it speaks to the way that people actually want to play their game. They should be able to play the game like they want to. When they log in to WildStar, they should be like, this is how I want to play it, and WildStar should cater to how I want to play this game. And if it doesn't, I'm not going to enjoy it. Like that's just as simple as it is. And so when a casual player goes in, they're forced to do this attunement step a very specific way that they don't find fun. Of course, they're going to go on the forums to complain, this is silly, I don't like doing this, right? But then introducing a way that they can still get the attunements, they can still get what they want, but now they can do it the way they want to do it, I think is much better. It's going to ultimately make the dungeon experience much more fun, because like you said, there's a lot of mechanics there. There's a lot of fights that are really cool. There's a lot of props in the dungeons that are very, very cool, like just Skullcano. I think that's a very cool dungeon for me. But Skullcano was one of those dungeons where unless you were doing very specific thing to skip very specific areas, if you were trying to pull every pack in there was no way you're getting silver. If you wiped on the jump puzzle 2 or 3 times, better reset it. Like it was very punishing, and because it gets a lot easier when you get better gear and you go back into those silvers and you're like, ah man, how is this ever hard? But you have to understand that for a lot of people stuck behind the silver dungeons, they don't have the gear that comes after. So they're stuck, and the only upgrades they get are through crafting, but they may not try to min-max every possible way, and they may not try to do all this stuff, so they're like, oh no, I'm going to go through my normal MMO progression, I just get dungeon drops are going to be better, and they hit this brick wall, and they get frustrated, and they're annoyed, and then they ultimately decide that they don't want to do this anymore, because the carrot that's dangling in front of you, as all MMO designers try to dangle that carrot, just close enough so you can smell it, but you can't eat it, and so you have to keep clearing content gates to get to that carrot. I feel like for casual players, that carrot's so far away they can't even see it. So
I think I'd question the degree to which player skill improves versus gear. I think people overrate the importance of gear. There are times when it's needed. Yes, Skullcano, if you get the underground route, you need a certain level of DPS to keep progressing through. That's a given. But I've seen so much improvement in people's base capability just by running again and again and again. And I think that the drop changes that are coming up, where you can effectively gear up in the dungeon through repeated running and actually gain improvements to your gear from boss after boss, I think that will go a long way towards fixing that. I guess the question I'd like to pose is, are we saying we want to see dungeon content act differently, be different, or are we looking for more of the same at the same difficulty level? Because actually, it's a good thing.
I think
Love more dungeons,
something that could possibly improve my dungeon experience personally is I've done my silvers and stuff like that, but finding a group to get gold is very, very tedious, and I think that obviously probably some of you guys are more hardcore than me and have already done it, but it's very, very hard to try and find a group that can, everybody is on the same skill level to do golds. Possibly something that I was talking about with a few guildmates with me was, instead of having, the bronze, gold, silver cut off where you can only get gold if you've died, you can't get gold if you've died, etc., etc. Maybe something like a penalty for dying, so you can still get gold if you die, you can still sort of achieve this, but obviously if you keep dying, the content gets harder and sort of harder. But
I disagree. I think the way that gold is set up is perfect. I've done all the golds, but I'll tell you this: getting a group is the easy part. In my opinion, there were parts when we were doing gold that just felt like it was completely, like, again, and I've talked to Time Travel before, and I don't know if Time Travel is actually in charge of dungeon design, but I've talked to Time Travel and see if he can query on to the correct people, that there are mechanics in dungeons that just felt frustrating, right? If you were doing a gold dungeon, you got a particular path, you would just reset the instance until you got the easiest path. And the problem is, like, when you're in Pug, you don't do that, right? You're forced to do the path that is laid out for you. But when you're in an instance group, like a pre-made group, you just do the easiest way. And I really think it's kind of lazy design if you have all this random, but the variance between all the randoms is so great, right? Kill 40 prisoners in Skullcano and get gold. It was like just really frustrating when you can get other optionals that were significantly easier. So I think it really needs to, you need to go through and balance out the different optionals you can get. And I know this was really very apparent at SSM. Some paths were much, much easier to do than other paths. And so people would reset if they got certain things. And even so, like, some of them were just completely downright impossible to do. I know Skullcano for the longest time at our current gear level back when the game first came out were just downright impossible to do on silver unless you got a very specific path, because we just didn't have the DPS requirement to do it at the time because we didn't have the gear for it. And obviously that's kind of a unique situation because normal people aren't pushing gear with the levels that we had. But I really think it speaks that all levels of all options that you get in the dungeon should be very equal. Should be, all the mini bosses should be kind of the same skill level all across, so that the time to complete shouldn't change from like 25 minutes to 40 minutes just because you get a different optional set. I think that's very lazy design.
But
because
they did,
it's like it's
do a
punishing the
pass.
player for the RNG, right?
They did do a pass through the dungeons to actually fix that, especially for SSM. It's now a lot better than it used to be.
I think it's also a little harsh to turn around and say, but it's so negative when people, reset and pick a different route. That is a choice that not everybody makes. I very, very few times have been on a run and reset. We just try and learn to deal with what's there. I agree the level of variance between time to complete needs to be tightened up, and indeed it has been. But I think it's a bit off for the community as a whole to go, but whenever we better, and then still ask for more variation.
I don't condone the idea. I think that having to reset your dungeon, it feels bad. Like I don't want to do it.
We don't do it.
I know there's players that constantly make that choice, but I feel like you shouldn't be in a situation where you have to make that choice. I feel like the element of that choice, you shouldn't be like, oh no, we make that choice. We're obviously even better, or we're. I think that your choice shouldn't be there. It just shouldn't be there in the first place. So I think if the variation between the time to complete of these various optional paths is brought down so it's like 1 or 2 minutes, you don't feel punished as a player for completing a path. Because even if you make the choice not to reset the instance, if you're going through a specific optional set in Skullcano and you get the easy one, you're going to be like, oh, sweet, we got the easy one, guys. But if you're going through and you got the hard one, you're going to be like, oh, man, we didn't get the easy one. And that kind of variation, it shouldn't be there. It should be a random element. You're like, oh, this is cool. I prefer this one over the other one because it's more fun, it's more exciting, but I'm not getting punished as a player because the RNG gods rolled something differently.
Usually when I get a hard set of optionals, I'm actually happy about it because I like the challenge they provide. That I can, and then having the bragging rights of still getting the silver timer done and time with those. So it depends on the player a bit, and I don't really see it as such a big problem as you make it out to be honest.
Where should the next dungeon be in terms of difficulty? Should it be pitched at Sword Maiden stroke Skullcano, or should it be something that's more accessible to people? Should it be harder than what's out there today?
I think
I'd like
that this probably should be a. I don't know the level of the Protostar games where that's going to be coming out at veteran difficulty, but I think possibly something between Storm Talon's Lair and maybe one of the adventures, something, which makes the introduction to a bit less of a.
That's exactly what they're going to do, actually. Well, I think it's before Adventures even. Protostar training is going to be level 10, and its veteran version will be the hardest veteran, probably, at 50.
Yep.
But where I'd like to see the next dungeon, possibly after Protostar, would actually be at level 50 at normal, and then harder than Salt Maiden on normal, but easier than the first veteran, because that's a bit of a big hurdle at the moment, like we mentioned before. It would be nice to have an extra stepping stone there in a normal dungeon. Then you can make it super challenging on veteran, just to challenge the small group people besides outside of the raid groups, basically.
A good idea.
A random point, by the way, with all the training mechanics that are going into the level 10 Protostar games, how on earth are we going to encourage a lot of people that have gone past level 10 who maybe, I'm not picking out any individual here, who maybe think they know everything but would still benefit from the learning experience of Protostar games to actually go through that content?
I think that
honestly,
with new content, I think that people are still going to play it, maybe not to the extremes that what you're saying is that people should be sort of running it a couple of times, more than once. I think that people will still check out the content, but maybe not run it as much as they may need.
Besides, for most of the existing players, they either already learned or they quit the game. Because, yeah, that's just what's happening at the moment.
But consider a lot of level 40s and 50s coming back into the game post-Mega Server. That's a target group you really want to see step through that content.
I think this brings me back to my original point. WildStar needs to figure out which player base they're going to cater to. They can't cater to everyone. You're never going to be able to cater to everyone. If you're trying to establish a healthy, tight-knit community, which is, I think, the best WildStar can shoot for at this point, then you need to either choose, we're going to go casual, or we're going to just cater to those hardcore players. Because at the moment, I feel like neither of these groups are being catered to. And like the hardcore players feel like they're being betrayed. Dungeons or raids keep getting buffed, and bugs and raids aren't getting fixed, and changes are coming to PvP, and that massively affects PvE players, and they're getting disgruntled about that. And then casuals aren't getting catered to because raids and dungeons aren't getting nerfed, and the accessibility really isn't there. So I think for the most part, Carbon needs to be like, okay, this is a group we're going to focus on, and I know we're going to make some people angry. Like, that needs to be taken as a given, and then they need to focus all their efforts on balancing and introducing concepts and content just for that group.
I have to say I don't find myself agreeing with you. I think the game offers many modes of play, many activities, many things to do, and they can all cater to different groups. There's been, promises made to various groups about the content that's going to be available to them. We've got to remember how long this game has been out and resist the urge to compare it to stuff that's been around for years and has been through so many balance passes. Definitions are tricky things. What the blazes is hardcore anyway? What the blazes is casual anyway? It means something different to absolutely everyone. I'd rather see focus on making sure there is relevant content at every single level, and making sure that the mechanics and the incentives, and indeed the sociology of the game, are such that people are encouraged to improve. And I would hate to see something whereby we say, hey, here's the lowest common delimiter. Let's make content for that. Because to me, that would be negative, and that doesn't even equate to balancing for casual. That just seems totally reactionary.
I agree with you saying that you can't just cater to one sort of people, because in the end, you're going to alienate those people. So I agree completely with what you're saying. Is there should be adequate adequate content at the right levels, which I don't want to say that it should be sort of like on an easy level, but it should be there to try and progress those people's skills up to maybe a level that they maybe never thought about that they'd be playing before. So
Yeah, for example, the dungeon placement I said earlier, like make a really, really hard fight veteran dungeon that people can see as their goal if they're incapable of getting into a raiding guild. And that could already lift them up higher than they usually go.
The
All right,
content is
folks,
there.
let me just interject here. We are out of time for the Dungeons and Raiding discussion. We now need to move on to the WildStar community in and of a whole. Be that kind of external sites, be that communities within the game. Who wants to start us off here?
I'd like to mention the Nexus report, to be honest, to get started with. It's something that I've been watching since release and absolutely love it. I do think that Frost leaving Carbine is, it's sad, but hopefully the show will go on and continue to improve. When the Nexus report was giving away the Gamescom codes, I think the peak of users, for an average Nexus report is about 500, 600 people, maybe something like that. When they were giving away the codes, I think it probably easily over 1,000 anyway. Obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what I remember. I'd like to see some sort of possibly more giveaways during the stream to obviously incentivize more people to watch it. But I think that the essence of just a giveaway will obviously attract more people who maybe don't know about WildStar and probably might want to see what it's all about. I think it just gives a bit more of incentive to watch it, because right now I think it's a really good show, but the amount of WildStar players who actually watch it, I think 500 is way below what it probably should be.
Can I just point out as a mini aside, that is very typical behaviour for Twitch. I've done things with 5,000 people in and things with 100 people in just because the word giveaway is in the title, and there isn't necessarily a guarantee that those people are invested in any way, shape, or form in anything other than the giveaway.
There is also one systemic issue with the Nexus report that I've noticed from watching it week on week. Carbine have a real problem tagging the game into the stream. Because of this, the actual stream a lot of times doesn't show up in the Twitch directory, and doesn't.
I've noticed that as well.
I've taken to kind of entering a question every time it happens on the stream saying taggy game, but because of that, you only get people who follow the WildStar Twitter, who know and are subscribed to the channel. A lot of times they're missing out on just general Twitch viewers.
Yep, if it's not tagged, that makes a lot of sense. What would be good to do, though, would be to encourage more community involvement with the show. Now, I don't get to see a lot of it because of other stuff I'm doing at the same time scale, but to what degree are people from the community being invited to participate with the show? Pull someone in from a guild, pull someone in from something else. Actually get more of the community going, hey, this is our show, we're part of it.
Yeah, beyond fan art, and occasionally someone who might be visiting the studio, no participation.
Yeah, I think the only sort of participation with the fans is through the questions. So maybe pulling someone up on like a Skype call or something, and bringing them into the show might be something to.
So I don't know how much. I don't know if this came up in the NA the town hall yesterday, but I can talk a little bit. I know that Tony and the guys over there are working on some changes. They do want to start bringing more people onto the show, community people, other streamers, that sort of thing. It is the thing with the Nexus report, and when it was WildStar Weekly as well, is that it was definitely designed because the whole. I mean, I'm sure all of you were around during beta and for launch. The live stream really started off as a pre-launch kind of thing to show off something new, to get a dev on to talk about the game. It was very promotional heavy, and I think that transition that has continued through launch, and they haven't quite transitioned it into a full-on. The game is now live. We have a fostered community. This is let's do something fun in game, that sort of thing. It hasn't quite progressed to that yet, but I do know that Tony and the team are definitely working on that transition and definitely kind of reshaping the show, especially with the sad departure of Frost as well. It's not going to be the same show without him there, and I think that they're aware of that, and they want to kind of not rebrand it, but kind of just readjust what it's there to do, really.
No more banter.
I like the banner. I think I like that.
I think that Tony and Frost were really good personalities on camera together, and but yeah, there definitely needs to be much more kind of plugging in with the community and things, and that's something that they're going to work on.
Like every week, like tons of content is churned out from WildStar fan sites in terms of like news articles and stuff like that. It just seems like to me, the Nexus report could be an excellent place for Carbon to actually interact with those things. Like have a section, 15-20 minute section on the Nexus report where like they go through and they'd be like, oh blah blah blah, said this article. Here's our opinion from the community or something like that. It just seems like a really great place for Carbine to give their voice to the world based on all this stuff that's happening every week.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely just a little bit of insight. I mean, I was one of the things we were going to try and do in EU was shift more of the creative stuff out of the Nexus Report live stream and do more like a regular kind of YouTube showcase show, kind of like a summoner showcase, but for WildStar. So all the fan art and the fun stuff would be in that, and then that would free up the Nexus Report to have more kind of like, oh, hey, there was this really in-depth article about this, and let's talk about that, or let's get a dev on to kind of respond to these thoughts or these theories or these opinions kind of here. Unfortunately, it's just a case of sorting out things like tech, and obviously with the EU office being so far out, it's a bit more difficult to do that. And Tony is, at the end of the day, he's only one guy. He can't kind of do everything that's video related. So but it's definitely something that we'd like to try and do more of, and definitely focus more on that community content out there.
Talking community, it's become, whether by accident or by design, as time went on, Frosty very much became the face of all things WildStar. Is there a view to have multiple people be the face of WildStar, or, for example, is Tony, yourself, or someone else going to become that new public image?
I don't think that there's. I mean, Frost kind of. It was never intended for Frost to be that. He sort of just became that because he was the voice of the Dev Speaks. He's just got such a great personality when he's on camera and when he's on interview. He is so involved with everything. Even though he was a producer, he was always involved in the community stuff that was going on. And whenever when PC Gamer wanted to do the weapons thing, they were like, we want Frost to be on it because, we love him in the Dev Speaks and things like that. So it kind of just happened. I don't think that there's a plan really to kind of have somebody else fill his position or even have multiple faces. I think now we kind of want, the whole team to be, there and interacting and not just have it focused on one person. I expect that there will be some natural stuff that happens. We all, if any of you have met Chad, that Chad's a great personality. He's the kind of person where if he's on a live stream, everyone's just focused on Chad, and he's really kind of captivates an audience. Tony's a very good front man in that he does the streams, he's very active on Twitter, and he's just got that larger than life personality. So whether it happens, but I don't think that there is a specific plan to.
Okay. I will say community-wise, although it's a much-used tagline, I do think... hang on. Alright, push to talk, foot pedal, and Twitch, TeamSpeak not interacting again. Although it's an oft-used tagline, I think it bears saying that I still see more interaction back community-wise with the devs are listening and responses than I do in almost anything else. So whereas we all like to go, hey, here's something bad, let's point it out, let's jump up and down about it, I think we do have to point out that there is a lot of two-way interactions, and whatever does happen going forwards, I'd hate to see that lost.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing where we're always pushing to kind of remain active and getting dev to respond to issues. There's also always the thing of like we want to make sure that those, any posts from dev are getting out to our French and German players as well, because obviously, all of our devs are English speakers, and so we want to make sure that gets translated. We are definitely trying to do more of that and make sure that the devs feel comfortable in responding to things, or even if it's then a case of them filtering stuff through to us and we're posting it from the community team, we're definitely trying to keep that up. And the devs are listening is such an integral part of the Carbine culture and the Carbine mentality. We definitely don't want to lose that either. So
So, well,
I killed.
I'm sorry to
Yes.
sort of go back onto Frost leaving. Would you say that people shouldn't be worried that such sort of a frontman for WildStar has obviously left the community, that they shouldn't be worried about what's now coming for the game, that it shouldn't sort of ring any alarm bells or anything like that?
Absolutely. I mean, definitely don't worry about it. This was a really hard decision for Frost. He sent a very kind of heartfelt message to myself and the EU team, kind of saying, I want you guys to understand this isn't about the game or anything. It's just, this is such a great offer and it's a great move for my career and things like that. He loves WildStar. He still firmly believes in WildStar, as we all do. It's a very difficult decision for him to leave, but he's worked on the game for a very long time. You do tend to, when you've worked on a project for like 6-7 years, that's a big chunk of your life invested into one thing. You've seen it happen, you've seen it launch, you've seen it grow. There is going to be a part that maybe wants to work on something else, but definitely it's not a case to be worried. This isn't, Frost running away or anything like that. It's just a case of, I think if it was a case of, he's going to a really cool company and things like that, I think in a way, part of him would like to stay, but he knows that this is such a great opportunity, he can't really pass it up. It's an offer he couldn't refuse, kind of thing. But no, definitely don't be worried. It's a case of this is very much a personal thing. It's not really anything to do with the game or the company. But I know a lot of people are going to feel that way, especially since we've seen a few other people go in the recent couple of weeks for the same reasons. Working on a project for a long time, or health reasons, or they've been offered something really awesome on a new project and things like that. But it's definitely not a cause of concern. It actually happens quite a lot in the games industry. I mean, I left my previous community manager job after 6 years, not because I didn't like the game or the community or anything like that. I just needed a new challenge and I wanted to work on something else for a little while. It's just very common, really. But yeah, don't worry about it. It's really not. It's very sad, and we're all going to miss him. But it's not anything. It doesn't mean anything indicative of the game itself. And he definitely wasn't fired because of the mega server tweet, as I just saw in the chat.
Wow.
Yeah, it was definitely not that. I think there was a couple of sort of like, oh, Frost, hands on hips, like wah wah. But yeah, nothing more severe than that.
Oh.
Do we have anything else on the topic of community, or do we want to change topic a little bit early?
I have to say, I don't think anything community is in a particularly bad place. We just need to introduce more people to the community that's out there, and that
Yeah.
runs into a general population statement.
Yeah, I guess there's a little bit more I can talk. This being something that I work on a day-to-day basis. We definitely, that's definitely something that we want to work on. Is just trying to, one thing. Give you an example. One thing that I really want to work on, especially with mega servers coming back and with the next, mega servers coming into play and the next drop. I really want to start working on a lot more kind of video guides and articles to help new players. help them through the starter zones, teach them some of those mechanics so that they can really get invested in that early game. We definitely want to do more of the things like the deep dives that we used to do in beta and just after launch, for next newer content and upcoming. Give something people to get excited about. We're looking at ways to do more things to get more people interested and generally reaching out to people. Things like, I know Tony mentioned it on the Nexus report. We will look at doing things like more free trials and guest passes and things in the future. We just sent out a bunch of old people that had registered interest for beta but never actually purchased a copy. And we're going to look at doing more things like that as well. But yeah, I mean, generally more posts from the developers, more posts from the community team, more interaction, more things like articles and new stuff. And the more that we can do, the better, really, at the minute. And that's definitely our kind of plan.
One thing that has popped into mind about community, if there's anything being sort of done in terms of pushing people towards, having that interaction with guilds and sort of giving them incentive to sort of make new friends.
It's something which I wanted to start, looking into. I mean, one thing which is, if I ever see people kind of saying like, oh, I don't have anybody to do world content with,